I urgently reached out to Edward, explaining that our parents were severely ill and that he needed to return home right away. Despite my earnest appeals, Edward dismissed my concerns coldly, insisting he was too busy with a work trip and accused me of overreacting. He ended the call abruptly, ignoring my attempts to keep him on the line. 4 weeks later, when Edward returned home, indifferent, I had to inform him that he had missed both of our parents' funerals. Confused and shaken, Edward couldn't believe what I was saying, thinking it was a cruel joke. I reminded him of the call I made about our parents' critical health condition, leaving him speechless and filled with regret. My name is Janet Rachel, a 51-year-old who has dedicated her life to her family, stepping away from a promising career in administration after getting married. My journey with Edward began in college through a shared interest in paddle. Although our initial interactions were anything but friendly, Edward, then the paddle club leader and focused on national competitions, was harsh and demanding, not caring for one's experience but only their skill. As a beginner, I struggled under his strict coaching, often relegated to merely picking up paddle balls after failing to meet his high expectations. However, driven by determination and a bit of frustration, I practiced tirelessly in private. This persistence eventually paid off dramatically during 2 practice sessions. To everyone's surprise, including Edward's, I returned one of his challenging serves with skill, earning his respect and admiration for the first time. That moment of success on the paddle court sparked a change in our relationship, transforming initial animosity into a bond that would later blossom into something deeper. After that pivotal moment on the paddle court, my feelings for Edward transformed into something much deeper. Despite Edward's continued strict demeanor and the rigorous training sessions, I found myself completely smitten with him. Our relationship took a significant turn during 3 of our monthly group gatherings. It was after one of these social nights, while walking home together, that Edward unexpectedly opened up about his feelings for me. He admitted he had fallen for me and expressed a desire for us to be together. I was surprised, as Edward had never shown any direct affection towards me before, but I was also elated because I harbored feelings for him as well. I eagerly accepted his feelings, and we decided to start a relationship. Edward suggested we keep our relationship a secret from our club members to avoid any impact on team dynamics. I was so deeply in love at the time that I didn't mind the secrecy. Being with Edward was all that mattered to me. Our relationship endured beyond college, leading to marriage when I was 23. At Edward's behest, I left my job, committing myself to be by his side forever. I was completely enamored, lost in dreams of a bright future together. 25 years have since passed since we got married. The early days were filled with excitement, frequent dates, and a strong sense of closeness. However, as the years went by, our life together settled into a more predictable routine. My attention to personal style and appearance has relaxed significantly compared to my 20s. Back then, I was all about fashion, meticulously choosing outfits and applying makeup for every date with Edward. Now, my wardrobe preference leans towards comfort, favoring loose, elastic-waisted skirts over anything more restrictive. As a homemaker who seldom interacts with people outside our home, I've embraced a more natural look, rarely wearing makeup. Reflecting on these changes, I can't help but notice how different I look compared to my younger self. I was quite slim back in the day, but time has brought changes to my physique as well. I've gained weight, and my appearance now aligns more with the before photos in weight loss advertisements. This shift in how I look might be contributing to the routine nature of our relationship, and I sense that Edward's perception of me has evolved from seeing me as his partner to something more akin to a maternal figure in his life. He even makes lighthearted comments, asking for coffee in a way that suggests I'm more of a caretaker than his wife. This transformation in our dynamic has been gradual, marking a significant evolution in our relationship from those early days of passionate love and shared ambitions. My husband's parents live close to us, just a 20-minute walk away, in their own apartment. They're genuinely kind people, always looking out for me, which has made me eager to support them in return. As such, I find myself visiting them quite frequently. However, their health has started to deteriorate lately. My father-in-law has been fighting a serious illness, and the doctors have informed us that there isn't much more they can do for him. With a heavy heart, he expressed a wish to spend his remaining days at home, leading to his discharge from the hospital to receive palliative care in the comfort of his own house. Caring for him has been a huge strain on my mother-in-law, who appears increasingly worn out and burdened by the situation. As someone who doesn't work outside the home, I've been assisting them nearly every day. Despite this, the full responsibility my mother-in-law bears is evident, and it's visibly taking its toll on her. On one occasion, she asked me if I could spend the night to help, her voice filled with hope. However, I had to decline because Edward, my husband, expects me to be home at night. My refusal left her disheartened, her disappointment palpable. Edward has a commanding presence and prefers not to involve himself in household chores, expecting meals ready and the house in order upon his return each evening. Leftovers are not an option for him, and any deviation from his expectations often leads to a severe reaction. There was a day I arrived home late from helping my father-in-law, only to be met with Edward's anger, prioritizing his needs over those of his own father. I remained silent, knowing that any attempt to argue would only escalate the situation. This dynamic has left me feeling trapped. As a homemaker, I feel a deep sense of guilt for not being able to stand up to Edward or adequately support my mother-in-law during such a difficult time. Edward's behavior has been increasingly erratic, often returning home late without notice, sometimes visibly intoxicated. His justification for his actions is always the same. It's his money to spend as he pleases. This pattern has left me feeling isolated and overwhelmed, caught between my duties as a wife and my desire to support my ailing in-laws. Despite my role as a homemaker, I found Edward's expectations for me to simply comply with his demands difficult to accept. His frequent nights out were becoming a concern, not just for me, but potentially for the families of those he was with. Edward, with his authoritative role at work, often took advantage of his position to coerce colleagues into socializing outside of office hours. He boasted about always going out with the same coworker, a man who lived alone and was single, claiming this colleague was always eager for the company and drinks. Faced with this situation, I tried to suggest a compromise to Edward, asking if he could inform me ahead of time about his plans. I wanted to be able to support his parents more effectively, especially given his father's deteriorating health and his mother's increasing stress. However, Edward dismissed my concerns with a laugh, insisting his outings were spontaneous and that his mother could manage on her own. He prioritized his needs over everything else, even going as far as to hurry me along with household tasks without regard for my feelings. Then, unexpectedly, Edward announced he was planning a 3-week trip to Thailand, leaving me shocked and full of questions. He had taken the initiative to request time off work and had even considered what he'd like to do and eat there. When I inquired about the sudden trip and mentioned that I didn't have a passport, he indifferently noted that it wasn't necessary since I wouldn't be joining him. This was surprising, especially since we hadn't even gone on a proper honeymoon due to his usual stance on saving money. Curious and concerned, I asked who he would be traveling with, given his past reluctance to spend on leisure activities, even for day trips with me. Edward's response was curt, stating he was going with a coworker and quickly shifting the conversation to demand dinner. I understood that pushing for more details would likely lead to an argument, leaving me frustrated yet resigned to prepare dinner as he wished. On the day of his departure, Edward left early in the morning, marking the start of his trip without further discussion. By noon, I was left to reflect on the dynamics of our relationship, recognizing the challenges of communicating my needs and concerns within the constraints imposed by Edward's expectations and behavior. In a state of urgency, I found myself dialing Edward's number, only to be met with impatience. "What do you want? I'm about to board a plane," he retorted, irritation clear in his voice. I pleaded with him, explaining the dire situation of his parents' health and urging him to reconsider his trip. Despite the possibility of him not having boarded yet, Edward dismissed my concerns coldly, claiming he was on vacation and insisting I deal with the situation myself. His lack of empathy was palpable as he hung up, leaving my calls unanswered thereafter. Murmuring a promise of regret to myself, I waited for his return. 3 weeks later, Edward came back, seemingly unaffected by the events that had transpired in his absence. When I confronted him with the news of his parents' passing, he reacted with disbelief, questioning me as though I was playing a cruel joke. I explained with a heavy heart the sequence of events that led to his parents' critical state and their subsequent deaths. Despite my regular visits and efforts to care for them, their sudden deterioration was something I couldn't prevent, leaving me with a deep sense of guilt and regret. My anger towards Edward grew, fueled by the memory of his parents' suffering and his blatant disregard for them. It was clear that Edward had always placed his own desires above the needs of his family, a fact that became even more glaring in the face of such tragedy. As I confronted him, accusing him of prioritizing a leisure trip over the well-being of his own parents, Edward's silence spoke volumes. He seemed unable to face the reality of his choices and the consequences they wrought. In that moment, my disappointment and frustration with Edward were overwhelming. The stark contrast between his carefree demeanor upon returning from vacation and the grave situation at home underscored the profound selfishness of his actions. My heart ached not only for the loss of my in-laws, but also for the realization that the man I had hoped would stand by me in times of need had chosen himself over everything else. Confronting Edward with a hint of sarcasm, I watched as he fell silent, prompting me to probe further about his recent 4-week getaway, insinuating it was with a lover. Edward, seemingly defeated, admitted to his affair with Donna, a coworker younger than me, who, in his words, brought him comfort unlike anything I could. His confessions revealed his late nights were not just overtimes, but time spent with Donna. Edward, thinking I was passively accepting his betrayal, boasted about Donna's qualities in comparison to mine, arrogantly undermining my worth. His next words were even more shocking. With his parents no longer around to object, Edward bluntly suggested a divorce, envisioning a future where he could live with Donna in our home, effectively telling me to leave. This proposal shook me to the core. Having dedicated my life to being a homemaker at Edward's request, I found myself without a personal income and lacking the confidence to start anew. Yet, the realization that Edward had chosen his mistress over attending to his ailing parents was the final straw, pushing me to decide to leave him for good. With a firm resolve, I left our home with only essential belongings and soon found refuge in a budget motel. A week into my new reality, Edward's call disrupted my peace, his voice laced with panic over a missing checkbook. Unfazed, I informed him that the financial documents and accounts under his name were left untouched at home. The only checkbook I had taken was in my name, filled with personal savings and gifts from my family, not subject to our joint property. Edward's desperation was evident as he revealed his financial recklessness, having blown through his recent salary and bonus on the trip. He had hoped to dip into my savings to cover his extravagance. Until now, I had never hidden my financial status from Edward, but it became clear he had taken for granted access to my resources. As he scrambled to resolve his monetary shortfall, I detachedly suggested he seek an advance from his paycheck, reinforcing my independence and his need to face the consequences of his actions alone. I firmly refused Edward's plea for assistance, then decided to enlighten him about his parents' financial situation. I explained that he shouldn't expect any significant inheritance since his parents had been reeling on their pensions and the expenses for his father's health care had consumed nearly all their resources. I also warned him about the necessity to vacate his parents' rental apartment to avoid further rent charges. Their financial struggle was evident, with every month being a challenge to balance the rent and healthcare costs. Edward, caught off guard by this reality, could hardly believe what I was saying. Seizing the moment to assert my independence, I cheerfully informed him that he was on his own, as I had no obligation to support him any longer. His response, filled with disbelief and desperation, betrayed his precarious financial situation and the loss of any familial support after his parents' passing. Despite his pleas and accusations of heartlessness, I remained unmoved. Edward's previous actions, especially his affair, and the manner in which he had expelled me from our home without consideration for my financial well-being, had depleted any empathy I might have had for him. Laughing at his plight, I reminded him that his current predicament was a direct result of his infidelity and decisions. Edward's concern about the potential fallout at work if his affair with Donna was exposed only highlighted the mess he had created for himself. I made it clear that Donna and Edward were the architects of their own downfall, and their loss of social standing was of no concern to me. Edward's last-ditch plea for assistance, acknowledging his mistakes, failed to sway me. I definitively ended the call with a warning of regret, sealing the end of any obligations I had towards him. Our divorce eventually proceeded. Edward, initially hesitant due to financial concerns and likely the implications of his actions becoming public, was finally convinced by legal counsel. The divorce marked the closure of a chapter defined by betrayal and financial recklessness, allowing me to move forward independently from the turmoil Edward had brought into my life. I took the decisive step of hiring a lawyer and finalized the divorce papers, marking the end of my marriage with Edward. Despite his usual arrogance towards me and my in-laws, Edward's demeanor changed drastically in the presence of our lawyer. His inability to assert himself in such a professional setting led to him being easily directed during the divorce proceedings. The outcome was favorable for me, resulting in an equitable division of our assets, largely due to my lawyer's expertise. Edward, having squandered most of his savings on a lavish trip with Donna, found himself in a financially precarious position. Following the divorce, Edward's situation worsened. Struggling to make ends meet, he faced the additional burdens of clearing out and covering the rental costs for my in-laws' apartment. Donna, who initially pursued Edward for her own professional gains, ended their relationship once the affair came to light, and Edward faced professional repercussions. With his demotion and Donna's transfer to a distant branch, she saw no further use for him, leaving Edward even more isolated. Feeling out of place at work and abandoned by Donna, Edward sought to reconnect with me, albeit indirectly through our lawyer. His attempts to win me back and his requests for financial assistance were relayed to me by the attorney, who couldn't help but find humor in Edward's desperate situation. Edward's entreaties, especially his plea for money citing his dire financial straits, only underscored his desperation and inability to manage his life post-divorce. This turn of events has left Edward facing a challenging future, a stark contrast to the life we once shared. His actions, driven by short-sighted decisions and a lack of foresight, have culminated in a situation of his own making. As for me, the clear communication from my attorney regarding Edward's requests only reaffirmed my decision to move on from this chapter of my life, looking forward to a future unburdened by Edward's mistakes. Witnessing Edward's difficulties brings a certain sense of justice to the whole ordeal, especially after learning about Donna's true intentions through my lawyer. Donna admitted that she was more interested in the perks of being with Edward than the man himself. She confessed to enjoying the financial benefits during their time together, but expressed regret for her actions, acknowledging that her interest was never genuinely about Edward, but rather his status. It's disheartening to see Edward so enamored with someone whose affection was so conditional, and there's a part of me that can't help but feel a sense of vindication watching the consequences of his choices unfold. In the midst of this chaos, I've taken steps to reinvent my life. I decided to re-enter the workforce and landed a part-time job at a local convenience store. It's a brand new experience for me, diving into customer service for the first time. Far from what I expected, I've found the job to be quite enjoyable. The concern I had about the physical demands of being on my feet all day quickly dissipated as I found myself immersed in the varied tasks, from manning the register to managing inventory and preparing snacks. The role also allows me to apply my knack for tidiness and organization to the store's upkeep. My manager has even hinted at the possibility of me securing a permanent position, citing examples of others who have successfully made such a transition. This opportunity has been a beacon of hope in what I initially feared would be a dim future post-divorce. Now in my 50s, I see this period not as a decline, but as a midpoint full of potential. The end of my marriage, rather than being a setback, has become a launch pad for new beginnings and adventures. I'm excited to see what lies ahead, determined to embrace life's opportunities with optimism and enthusiasm. This mindset shift has been empowering, and I'm eager to continue exploring what life has to offer, moving forward with a renewed sense of purpose and joy.